Hey, this is Nina, and I'm going to talk to Tanner and Corey about farming, which I know very little about, but I do know about doing tough stuff, and I do know that farming is not easy. So stick around, and we'll talk about how you get through even the toughest times in your industry and in your life, because life is tough, but you're tougher.
Farm4Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm4Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm4Profit Podcast.
And listeners, welcome back to the Farm4Profit Podcast. You got Tanner here.
And Corey is here.
That's right. You don't sound like you're super chipper.
I can be chipper. I'm going to drink this Red Bull, and I'm going to get there. It's been a whirlwind of a week.
This is
nothing bad, just a lot of stuff.
The week before we start our real trade show tour,
which we started already.
We did. It was like a test run, a trial run, headed down to FarmCon.
Yeah.
But no, we're getting ready to spend more time in a hotel than in our own beds for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah. I can't say, I'm excited, but at the same time, as a father, I'm a little bit,
Sure.
I feel bad, but we'll get through it. This is where the magic happens, right?
That's right. And listeners, we appreciate you. You're part of the reason we get to go on these tours. So if you're going to be out and about, come see us. We'll be in Indy. We will be in Louisville. Of course, we'll be in Des Moines. We're going to head out to Denver. So if you're around those areas, come check us out. If there's some place that we should be that we don't already have scheduled, send us an email, farm4profitllc@gmail.com, or send us a text, 515-207-9640 while we're there. You know what we should do? Like when you see bachelorette parties, they write on the windows of their party bus or their car, they're like, Venmo me for a drink, buy the bride a drink.
Yeah.
We should do a Venmo for like buy Corey a drink at Louisville. Or
buy me a bag of corn.
Bag of corn. Yes.
buy me a ton of nitrogen.
I like that. I like that a lot. But no, thank you so much, listeners. We're excited for 2025. We're trying to gear that content exactly to what we think you need at this point in time. So if there is something we're missing, you need to tell us. And that's how we drive forward. But we started off, at least I tried to have high energy at the beginning of this, because I know our guest is going to have even more energy than you and I combined. And I'm excited for this because it's a message that sometimes maybe gets overlooked, and two, it's hard to talk about.
What is that?
Resiliency. Can you spell that?
No. I can't read half the time, let alone spell.
Well, we are going to introduce you to our guest, a former USA gymnast, an Emmy award-winning news anchor, and a best-selling author. So already way more qualified than...
She's probably sitting here cringing at our camera techniques, our mic techniques, all that kind of stuff.
And listen to this. Her name is Nina Sossamon-Pogue.
Spell that.
Yeah, right. Good luck. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. I will bring the energy. I got you, Corey. We'll get there.
I'm getting
And I'm
there.
not even drinking Red Bull. I did have a coffee, though, right before we began.
Oh,
Thanks for
nice.
having me on.
Hey, listeners and friends, thanks for listening to the Farm4Profit Podcast and enjoying our content. But it's time for us to find out more about our audience. If you wouldn't mind heading over to farm4profit.com at the top of the page and take our survey to give us a little background on who you are and what we can be doing better as far as content goes. Everybody that takes the survey will be entered into the opportunity to win $100. So we look forward to getting your feedback. Again, head over to farm4profit.com, click that survey link at the top of the website, and we thank you in advance for your feedback. I love your background, your environment. You've got a real microphone. So this isn't your first time doing this.
No, I created a podcast booth. We bought during 2020, we downsized and bought this cool little house that I love. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. And I made this space into my own little podcast booth. It's really so I don't have to clean up my office. I can just plug in and it all looks decent behind me. I throw some lights up and it sounds better. But yeah, I come from you said it, I have some news background, called a couple buddies of mine and said, hey, help me set this up. And it's a cool little space.
So I'm imagining it's like underneath the stairs going up to your...
It looks really small behind you.
It's not that small. It's about a big walk-in closet.
There you go.
Do you have guests? Can you have guests?
Oh, can I have guests in here? No, I do keynote speaking. And so I have a setup out in my office space where I'll do something like that with a green screen. But no,
Right.
on my podcast, I do guests like you guys do. And it's just me.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
so I don't have guests.
Let's go back for our audience. Let's start with young Nina and kind of work our way up through the process and learn about who you are.
Well, as you mentioned, I was a gymnast. So I was on the U.S. gymnastics team back in the day. Moved away from home when I was 13 and into an Olympic training center in Washington, D.C. So I was like on all the cover of the magazines, Olympic hopeful with Mary Lou Retton and that whole crowd, Bart Connor. It was the 80s. And then I didn't make the team. So I talk about resilience mostly, like you gave me a lovely glowing introduction. Mostly I talk about my failures and things that didn't go right. So I didn't make the Olympic team after being on the cover of all these magazines. Thought my life was over at the bright old age of 16, almost 17 at the time. And then I went off to college and was a D1 athlete. I went to LSU, big ag school. Went to LSU and I was a gymnast there. Strong gymnastics program, strong sports program in general, good D1 athletics. Competed there for a year, and my freshman year, I blew out my knee. So again, kind of lost my identity, didn't know who I was. I went through a big, phase of my life trying to figure out who I was without gymnastics, having, traveled the world, as representing the United States and then being there and being at LSU. Back then it was kind of your bumper sticker and your sweatshirt and your, baseball cap. Nowadays it's your Instagram, it's your everything. So losing your sport, at 19, it was really difficult and I had to kind of figure out who I was. But as you mentioned, then I found TV and had a whole nother chapter at that. As we go through these different chapters of my life. And then I had a big, 12 years, a dozen years in tech. A big software company. Yeah.
That's exciting.
That's the gymnastics piece. And I always like to say, because I speak on resilience, I didn't always get it right. Like when I blew out my knee in college, they made me work in the laundry room. Y'all will like this. So in order to keep my scholarship, I had to work in the athletic laundry room and not like washing cute little leotards and stuff. No, it was all the athletes. So I like to joke sometimes that my claim to fame was almost that I washed Shaquille O'Neal's jockstrap. I was like, it could have been totally different back in the day.
I was just going to say, how big would that have had to have been?
It was
Absolutely.
it was a very depressing part of my life working in the laundry room. I used to get up and I was in a wheelchair for a while and then it was a really bad injury. And then I was on crutches and I used to get up and take my Percocet with a shot of Jaeger and go through I did not make all the right choices. So I made some poor choices back in the day. But I did end up finishing up college, graduating in booze and boys. So proud. And then got a degree and became a journalist and then had real big success in television for a lot of years. Yeah.
I can't wait to dive into that. It reminds me, not to the same level of yours, but my wife's story of being a high school athlete. So she had 3 knee surgeries in 4 years, 3 ACLs and an MCL, if I remember correctly, and spent more time with her foot in the air than her foot on the ground, unfortunately. But yeah, I can only imagine how frustrating that would be to have the sport that you play, the sport that what your identity has been, just ripped away. And I can't help but think for our farmers, it's not necessarily being ripped away right now, but there's probably more of a fear. Would you say that it could happen?
We definitely see it coming, right? We've gotten a little bit of boost in the markets these last week or two here after the report, the WASD. But man, we foresee it. I hear it every day just in the seed industry of people switching to more corn because corn's a little bit more profitable right now than soybeans. But what are we going to do? We're going to we're going to do it to ourselves. We're going to plant way too many acres of corn. And then all of a sudden we're going to have this glut and we're going to see some really crappy prices, I think, coming if we get just an okay crop.
Josh Linville put out his fertilizer report and everything's getting more expensive.
Yeah. It's funny how that works. Everything gets more expensive on the input side and the markets go down. And we're going to do it to ourselves. It's unfortunate. But they're doing what we're telling them to do. Where's the most profitability? Corn. What are we going to do? We're going to switch some acres to corn.
Right. So before we jump into the journalism part of your background, Nina, What do you have as advice or the ability to help communicate around the art of decision making when your back's up against the wall or you feel like it's all ripped out from underneath you? Because we as farmers are making a lot of decisions right now, making a plan for this year.
Yeah, and that's where my work lies now. So I'm an author and a full-time speaker, and my research and my work is on resilience. And so first I'll just it's perfect for your folks. The concept of what resilience is, I think a lot of people don't know what that word is. It's not just like get down when you get knocked up, it's knocked down, or regroup when things don't go as planned. That's persistence or grit to just get back up and keep going. That's more persistence or grit and double down, go hard. Resilience is something different. It's what your folks are doing now. It's adapting, learning, growing stronger, and adapting in a positive way to what life throws at you. It's the adapt piece that's really key. And the example I always use is like January 2020 for a lot of people. We all had like plans and things we were going to do and vacations we were going to take or something we were going to do that year. And then the world changed. So we had to all adapt. You couldn't just double down and go harder. Persistence and grit weren't going to get you through there. You had to adapt in a positive way. So what your folks are doing right now is exactly that. How do you adapt, and what does it mean to adapt in a positive way? Not just pivot, but what is a positive way? And that's where my research and my work has been. And there are 4 different areas you can look at to try to figure out a path forward. I just launched in November my Now What workshop, and it's when you get to those moments like now what, like people like I got divorced. Now what? I had a death in the family. Now what? My house just burned down. Now what? Like I got paralyzed. Now what? Like what are these big moments where you just feel like I'm not sure I can even move forward? Like the whole world feels like it's just not going to work out. So those 4 things are, and I call it this framework, THIS. And it's this time, we can dig into it if you want to. It's this timeline thinking, which is perspective. And then this humans, like who's helping, who's hurting. And then the I is isolate, not before or after, what are we dealing with? And then the S is the story, the words in our head that come out of our mouth and become our reality, that self-talk, all those, negative language that we have. So those are the 4 pieces of it. And I think in your instance right now, one of the biggies is the I piece of it, the isolate. So it's really interesting. So when something happens, and so your listeners know, this is a mashup of neurology, cognitive behavior therapy, some PTSD training, stoicism, and my own life experiences and research that I've done. It's kind of my own mashup of this. But the I piece is really key. So if we look at like a timeline, like your whole life, and we're in a moment right now, you could draw a line and go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, like put 10 dots across it. Assume We're going to live to be 100, which I need to drink a lot less wine, take better care of myself. But say I get there and skip the bourbon altogether. I love bourbon. So like if you made that line, that timeline, you're somewhere on it right now. I'm in the 50s, so I can put my dot there and know where I am. But the isolate piece is, and any good therapist will tell you, if you're spending a lot of time in the before, the woulda, shoulda, coulda, how'd I get here? Why'd I choose to be a friggin' farmer? Like whatever. Like why was I born into this? Like whatever your thing is. Why did I plant this thing? Like if you spend a lot of time in the past, that's where depression lives. Any good therapist will tell you. And if you spend a lot of time in the past and the woulda, shoulda, couldas, that's the past, and that's depression. And if you're spending all your time in the future, the what ifs and the doomsday scenarios, which I know you guys do. I spoke at a cybersecurity conference recently. They spend all their time there because they're just worried about what's going to happen next. Yeah. But you guys are very similar. Like, what if this crop doesn't work? Like you said, what if we overplant it? What if there's not a market for it? What if we have a drought? Like, whatever. If you spend all your time in the what ifs, that's where anxiety lives. So if you're thinking about the woulda, shoulda, couldas, that's depression, and all of the what ifs is where anxiety lives. So we get ourselves caught up in that, and you have this right now that is really all you can take control over. And what can you actually do right now, and what's in your control that you can handle? And that's a big piece of my 4-part pillar that's really helpful when you think about it in that framework. And it makes you aware too, like I am spending all my time in the past or in the future. And of course my brain is doing all these things because as humans, we have the pieces of our brain that will have cortisol, adrenaline, like all of that is just wearing us down and making us sick. Yeah, it's really fascinating.
So what do we do if we're like 50-50 depression and anxiety? Like it's like both ways, right?
Right. And a lot of us live there. I mean, it's the world we live in. It's a scary place right now. And one of the things I always say is you spend most of your time in your own head. Make sure it's a nice place to live. Yeah. You got to work on the language in your head. That's the S piece. The words in your head come out of your mouth and become your story. If it's always this sucks and this is never going to work, all that self-sabotaging language, like overgeneralizing, this always happens, or catastrophizing, this is never going to work, it's ruined. Jumping to conclusions like, they didn't get back to me on this, so they must be going to get fired, or they're not going to take on this. And we exaggerate. I've got 8 million things to do. Those things, all that self-sabotaging language is really difficult to live in a head that has that going on all the time. So we have to work on reframing that language.
Yeah, boy, there's so much to talk about already as it relates to farmers. And it is difficult because, like Corey said, I think a lot of our listeners spend half their time in the past and half the time in the future. They're thinking about what could have gone right during this growing year. Oh, if I just would have had more rain, or if I would have, for us this year had less rain,
or marketed sooner,
or could have marketed. Yeah. You think about that in the past, and then right now it's input buying season. If you haven't already got things locked in and you're worried about the future, gosh, what happens if nitrogen keeps climbing higher? Or, what happens if my landlord really wants to raise his cash rent, and you spend a lot of time worrying about that? How do you stay in the today? How do you say, this is what I can do right now, I'm going to go do it the best I can?
Well, it's you working on your own brain. It's one, being aware that you're spending a lot of time in the past, and that's why you're so down, and being aware that you're spending so much time in the future, and that's why you're so anxious. There's a study that came out of Cornell not too long ago, and it found that 85% of the things we worry about never happen. So imagine like all the energy that you are spending worrying about. I know you got a plan and have a plan B, and like you got the livelihood of your family and your community at stake. Like you got to worry about the future. It's part of what we all do. But 85% of the stuff we worry about never happens. And our ability to have an understanding that we're spending so much energy and making ourselves sick thinking about these things, and look more at, okay, what can I actually do right now? And let's come up with a plan A, B, C, D, or, let's know that that is out of my control. Here's what's actually in my control today. Let me work on that. Let me focus on something that's health that I know is going to help with the future. And so part of what we talk about is like the you 5 years from now. What is that person? What would that you 5 years from now be proud of? You have no control over the weather. Obviously, you have no control over these reports that come out or the price of nitrogen. Like, wouldn't you love it if you had some control over that? But you just don't. And giving up that control a little bit and saying, this is the world I live in, and knowing failure happens. And you guys know that better than anybody. You have good years, bad years. When I talk in some corporate settings, I'm like, you had good quarters, bad quarters. But you guys have good whole years, like whole seasons that can make or break you. And that is really out of your control. And making yourself sick with the worry is just making yourself sick.
Dave said that, the 85%.
He did.
Yeah. A week or two ago. He must have read that study.
See, I didn't make that stuff up.
I'm struggling with this.
Well, and they even said that the piece that the other 15%, that all but 3% of it, people said when it actually did happen, it was stuff they could handle. So it was only 3% that was like when you took it down to that. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tanner. Go ahead.
No, that was valuable. And I'm just struggling with the whole thing because it can't be easy, right? The self-sabotage, I think, happens in agriculture way more often than we allow ourselves to tell people. Like when you said isolate, I immediately went to the connotation of isolate as farmers or isolated individuals. We're
already isolated.
We don't share feelings. We don't talk about things. That's starting to grow a little bit, but I do this because I don't want my neighbor to know, or I do this because I'm embarrassed to share, whatever that in ourselves is about. So you start off with a personality like that, which in my opinion changes the whole I as far as that a battle that we've got to work with.
Well, that's the H piece. So if I can go back, it's THIS. The T is this timeline thinking that I was talking about. Like, where does it fit in on your timeline? And I'll get to the H in a sec. So the timeline is that 1 to 10, and like you can put the dot on where you are now and everything that happened before, and everything that happened after. But part of that timeline is all the blank space ahead. Even on your worst day, you can put that dot on there and like look at all the blank space ahead. We don't know what's going to happen there. No matter what happened before, anything could happen. You could decide tomorrow, either one of you. I think Corey could do this. I think he could decide tomorrow, like, screw this whole farming thing. I'm going to dye my hair purple and get a face tat. And
no. It won't be purple. It'll be orange. It'll be orange.
Definitely be orange.
Get a big face tat and a Harley, and I'm just going to go and see the world's largest roadside attractions, like the world's largest tire, the world's largest. Like, he could totally go off the rails and ditch family and farming and everything, and it's his life. So this concept of it, you get one life, and you don't have control over everything that's going to be dealt to you, but it's yours, and how you think about it and what you do with what you're dealt is all you can do. And there's all this blank space ahead that anything could happen, and it could be great. Your next chapter could be your best chapter. Y'all could have the best year you have had in a long time coming up. It could happen. And this energy that you're spending on the what ifs, the piece of the self-sabotage, that I think the one I didn't mention that's probably, now that I think about it with your industry, is the belabor. Like, if only I'd done this, if Bob had just done this, if we had just, that belaboring piece is probably a big part of the self-sabotage that you guys do to yourself. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the timeline. That's the T in the this.
So on the timeline, you mentioned, you kind of breezed over it, that what would 5 years from now self be proud of? Yeah. That's not an easy task to think about either, because 5 years ago, I would not have thought I'd be doing what I'm doing today. And I'm proud of this, but that wouldn't have been on my radar 5 years ago.
Yeah. And there's a lot of negative points along that timeline that you thought was possibly the worst day of your life, or one of, and at the end of it was probably for the best.
No, 100%.
How do you have that?
When you look back, how do you have that clarity to even look 2 years ahead?
Yeah.
I think most of us could probably look a year and say, hey, by this time next year, I want to have my operating note paid off, or I want to have accomplished these things personally or in my family or professionally. I think 1 year is doable for our audience. Well, how do you go beyond that?
The reason you do 5 years is because you don't have any control over all the things that may happen to you, whether they made you stronger. I mean, when you go through tough times, it's going to make you stronger. What you get right, you don't learn from. You only get wrong. You only learn from the struggles and the things you do wrong in life. Just, you're going to learn and grow. So that's part of it. But the 5 years thing is so important because you don't have control over that. And what you do have control over what you do right now. So sometimes you have to go, okay, 5 years from now, I'm going to be here. But what can I do right now that the 5 years from now would be proud of? You're just making one decision. Instead of making the decision for right now, you can go, okay, I'm going to win this year or lose this year. It's going to be good or bad or whatever. But 5 years down the road, am I going to be proud of the decision I'm making right now? Whether it works or not, I'm making the best decision I can with what I got to work with in this moment. And that's all we can do. That's all we can do. So that's where that 5 years down the road is. You don't have to have all the answers. I'm a big fan of it's okay not to have all the answers. You just have to do the best you can in the moment that you have right now. But the other piece that I preach often, and this will really be important. So if you don't remember anything I say, all of you farmers out there, if you remember nothing that I say, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. Like, stuff's gonna happen. Sorry, I should edit there. Stuff's gonna happen. Okay. Well, if I call about the big thises that happen in our life, if you rearrange the letters in this, you can figure out all of that. So that's going to happen. This thing you have to deal with. And you don't have a lot of control over a lot of things. You control how you react in the moment. And you have control over, how you pull in people or get help or whatever. That's all you really have control over with. So, and it's not all going to be good. And so it's okay to not be okay, to be sad. And I know you guys don't do emotions or whatever. Like, it's okay to be sad and to be mad and to be frustrated. Like, that's all okay. That's life. And it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the only person that's going to get you out of that is you. And you've got to get into your own head and make some good choices. So you got to put on this timeline, see the blank space ahead. You got to isolate it, not before or after. What can I actually do right now? The story, that self-sabotaging piece. And then the H that I skipped, the THIS, is the humans part. And what I tell folks to do with that is, in any situation when you're going through something or something's happening, and this is maybe where you folks might need to work on this a little, you should never try to go it alone. People who have big success, athletes have coaches, big entrepreneurs follow the path of someone who tried to do this before. Executives call each other when they get in a bind. People who've made big discoveries have pulled people in for ideas. People who have had big success in life don't go it alone. So you can take, when something happens, all the people in your life, and I always say draw a circle around the this, put the this on your timeline, then draw a circle around it on a piece of paper and go, who's in this with me? Because it feels really alone when you're in these things. Like truly, you're not alone in thinking you feel alone. We all feel alone when the shit hits the fan. Like it's happening to us, not everybody else. So nobody knows it like you do. But you draw a circle around it, and you got to know it's not okay to go it alone. So you can edit your people, who's helping and who's hurting. Sometimes I'll have people, when I do a workshop, put it on one side of the paper and the other. Who's helping, who's hurting? And everybody has to go on one side or the other. There's nobody that, the people who love you the most may actually be hurting in some situations. And then you have to figure out who to pull in the circle with you. Who's missing? Who can help you move forward out of this? Is it a mentor? Is it an investor? Is it a friend? Is it a relative? Like, you don't go it alone. Somebody sees it differently than you. Someone's gone through it before. Someone's, willing to help, or willing to at least help you keep your sanity through a really tough time.
Now, I'm going to say that for our listeners, we're willing to help. We're not certified. We don't have any training that Nina has. We don't have any of the research that she's done, but we can talk. We can talk to anybody. I mean, we sit behind a microphone twice a week to be able to talk to strangers that we've never met and get to meet some of you awesome people out at trade shows or other events. And y'all know the phone number. Mm-hmm. I mean, we haven't made a jingle yet for it. And I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but just truly putting it out there that you can. Now there's two things that out of what you said that stuck with me. I've never heard the second half of it's okay to not be okay. Like that's usually where it stops.
Yeah.
Whenever somebody says it. And I like how you continued that on to just don't stay that way.
Yeah, that's up to you. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. You have to, and everything takes, you have a death of a loved one. You have a year where you lose your farm or your home. Like it's going to be bad for a while, and it's going to be bad, like really bad, and all the emotions, but it's not okay to stay that way. Sooner or later, you've got to get your head in the game and make some decisions and move forward.
Yeah. And I'm going to second also your comments on those that are around you. I think you can divide them pretty clearly as to who's hurting you and who's helping you. Mm-hmm. And that's a fascinating thing to do. And it's going to be a hard task for our listeners because it could be somebody that you work with every single day that's not on the helping side.
Right. So you eliminate them or...
Yeah, eliminate them. That's what we're going to tell our listeners to do. Just eliminate them.
Or maybe just don't rely on them as much. It's okay to be friends with them still.
Yeah.
Well, don't count on them. Don't let them in the circle. Don't count on them. Just edit the way in which you react or interact with them. I mean, a lot of times it's family and people you're going to be around anyway. Like you can't actually get rid of them. I've been married twice, so I have gotten rid of a few. But you do need to edit, like who's helping and who's hurting in your life. What are you trying to do, and who is the support system in that? And one of the most important things to do with that exercise is, obviously, like you said, the people who aren't helping, arm's distance or change that relationship a little bit. But if there's nobody in the circle with you helping, that's a red flag. You've got to find someone to be in the circle with you. You got to find someone, you got to let somebody in. You can't stay in there by yourself.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to rewind, and we're talking about a lot of, it's no question we're going to have a problem at some point in life, whether we're playing a sport, whether it's family, whether it's, death of a loved one, it's your business, whatever. You're going to have problems. Otherwise everyone would do it, that make it that easy. how do we prepare ourselves? Is there ways? I mean, I'm going back to your sports analogy. That was all I knew at the time was sports, right? Sports, you can go practice to become better. You can go to the gym and get stronger. You can ice, you can do nutrition, you can do all this stuff. How do we prepare to be resilient?
Resilience is a muscle. Every time you handle something, you're getting a little stronger. You had mentioned Tanner went through some stuff last year, like didn't know he would end up here 5 years from now. Whatever he went through made him stronger. So you have to know, like part of it's the acceptance piece that things are not going to go well. It's a piece of life. And that's some stoicism. You can read Ryan Holiday's books. Obstacle is the way is one of my favorite. If you don't know that one, or ego is the enemy. Obstacle is the way is probably better for your listeners than the others. But, and motivation and inspiration, they're like a shower. You don't do them once and get over. You need a little bit of it every day, or at least a few times a week. You need some motivation and inspiration. So part of strengthening your resilience and getting stronger is making this thought pattern part of your life of knowing that things aren't always going to go as well as they're going to, and then having a framework to handle everything that gets in your way. The little you get stuck in traffic, or somebody calls in sick, or you jump into something and 50 people hit you with their problems before you can even get to your work for the day. All that little rearrange the letters, you know what it is, that stuff, that is where you can make the most. That's where you can get the most resilient. Don't let it take your energy. Don't let it sidetrack your day and your emotions. Know that these things happen. Handle them in a way that doesn't suck all of your energy. Don't let it stay with you. Like those things don't go into the book or the story of your life. They're just stuff that has to get dealt with to get to the rest of your day. Like every time you start dealing with things a little better, you're becoming a little more resilient. And then knowing and having a framework for when things don't go as well. And that's why I put this in front of people on this THIS. Put it in that timeline of your life. See where it fits in. It's not your whole story. It's a crappy chapter. Like to see where it fits in, and then pull in the right humans, isolate it, not before or after, and then work on that language in your head and that story. Knowing that you have a framework for when something goes wrong can help you be more resilient. But each time, the answer to your question is each time you handle something, you're becoming more resilient. And if you're around a lot of people who've had a very easy life, which I'm guessing where you guys are, that everybody's gone through some stuff, like in your industry, like nobody gets a pass that it's great and perfect all the time. The people who've had the tougher lives are more resilient, and you can rely on those people when things go wrong. Surround yourself with some of those people. Don't hire people that have been through some stuff. Don't just hire people who have had easy lives. So when the shit hits the fan, you've got some people around who know they can pick themselves up and keep going.
Are you ready to power through your harvest? Meet the Maya Cornheads. They're designed for maximum efficiency and unmatched durability in the toughest of conditions.
With precision engineering and advanced features, Maya Cornheads ensures every kernel counts, giving you the performance and reliability that you need. Get more from your harvest with equipment built to last.
Reach out to your local Maya Cornheads dealer or visit mayacornheads.com to find your perfect match today. Maya Cornheads, harvest with confidence.
So, similar path, but not talking ourselves anymore. How do we help our children along with this who haven't seen the problems? Like my daughter's biggest problem is, someone didn't sit by her on the bus, and then she's not, no one likes me and all this kind of stuff. That's her biggest problem in her world, which is, first world problems. But how do we help them along?
It's very real. It doesn't mean it's not a problem. It's really her reality, and it makes her sad and all the emotions. So I have 3 kids. They're all adults now, but I remember all those days. And when they didn't get into the college they picked, or when the boy dumped my daughter, or when my son didn't make the basketball team, like all those, my life is over, like fetal position on the floor. So those are very real. I will tell you this, and I'm a huge fan. My kids, and not to brag, but my kids are really healthy, successful adults. I'm super proud of them. I've got a son in the Air Force, as an officer in the Air Force with a mechanical engineering degree. I've got one who's just finishing med school. And then I've got a daughter that lives in New York and works in AI, and they're just thriving. But partially, I think one of the things I did right, and Lord knows I did not do it all right. So I'm not saying I did, but is I let them fail. I let them fail. Let her struggle on the bus. Yeah. Why does it make you feel this way? Well, let's see what we can do to make, who do you want to sit next to? Let's work on that. I let my kids fail. I never called the school and said, can you fix this? They didn't get into the college. I didn't call the college. I was like, oh, well, let's go to number 2. When my son had Tommy John surgery, his dad was a pro ball player, played for the Expos and for the Phillies. And I was, a world-class athlete. And so we had these like super jock kids. But he had Tommy John surgery and all the D1 schools stopped calling. And I had to just kind of let him sit in it. Like he thought his life was over. And I knew that feeling. And I can remember sitting with him on the screen porch and he was just a puddle. And he's like, my whole life is over. I wasted my whole life in the dugout around sweaty guys. Like it was all bad. Like his life was over. And he couldn't have imagined back then that he would find something else to fall in love with and decide to be a doctor, much less a neurologist. And now he's going to go, like, he just was over at Oxford presenting in grand rounds. Like this kid who was this sweaty jock could not have imagined where his life would have taken him. But I let him sit there and just sit in it. I didn't tell him it was all going to be okay. I didn't tell him that, I just said, this really sucks. This is really hard. This is what suck feels like. Yes. So I think part of what we have to do, and I think parents need to do more of it, is let our kids fail. When my daughter was a dancer, was probably your daughter's age, and like didn't get the part she wanted in the Nutcracker and thought she was better than the other girl, but the other girl's mom like showed up and brought snacks, and I was never the snack mom. I did not do the suck up thing. So she didn't get the part. She's like, I got to be a damn soldier again this year in the Nutcracker. I was like, wow, that super sucks. And she just sucked it up and was the soldier again. I was not going to go call and fix things for them. So that would be, like, if you want to make resilient children, you have to let them fail. And it's not easy to see your kids hurting, but they will become resilient adults who figure out how to get themselves out of stuff. And I went through a time in my life where I was a really dark time. I touch on that in my first book, where I wasn't sure I could even go on. I was really in a dark place. And I look at that now, and I wanted to make sure my kids were strong. So if they ever got there, they could get themselves out of a tough spot. Yeah, let them fail. It's a horrible thing to do, but it's hard. It's hard to let them fail too.
I almost feel like we can watch them and learn from them as well. Like I've had the opportunity last couple of years. My oldest broke her arm just before basketball season a year ago, and still made it a point to earn herself back into the starting lineup. This year, she broke her foot just as basketball season was starting, and sitting back and watching her, it sure, a little pity in the beginning, a little frustration with that, but immediately her mentality just, nope, this is my next 6 weeks, or this is the next 8 weeks. And I couldn't believe that. But I started watching other kids. Like we're in the shop and a nephew falls down, starts crying, and immediately, 5 seconds later, just like every young boy does, he's done crying and he's back on his scooter, or, he's running back over to the tractors. Kids are resilient.
Yeah.
Even without having to make them fail or making sure that they get into a position like that, we probably can learn from that a little bit ourselves.
And don't take it away from them. Like if you start fixing everything, if he fell and you ran over there and scooped him up and, then you're taking away his ability to self-regulate and figure out how to get up and keep going. My son who had Tommy John, so he ended up playing D3 ball for a year. He came back, he was a pitcher, right-handed, threw under 90, like he was never going to, in all of 6 foot, nothing. He had a chance to play in college, but he wasn't likely to make it to the pros, but it's all he wanted. So he played D3 ball for a year and then popped his elbow and played JUCO ball down in Florida for a year. One of the big schools to, the recruits to see him from the pros. But all he wanted was to do that. And I remember the day that he called me sitting in his truck, sitting in his pickup truck in the parking lot, and said he just popped his elbow again, just crying. I mean, just a grown boy in his 20s, just lost it. And I loved it that he would call me and like needed somebody to share that with. And I sat in that with him. But I had to kind of let him just sit in it and go, this super sucks. Like, this is what suck feels like. And it's not going to go away real fast. But again, he'd picked himself up off the floor, off his skateboard or whatever when he was a kid, and he figured it out. There was a lot of drinking after that, I think. But then he did finally figure it out. He made poor choices for a while, but then he figured it out and got himself to a better place. I'm so proud of him now. But had I jumped in and like driven, he was down in Florida, driven down there or tried to help, or I had to just let him be at every age, just kind of let him have to be sad and mad and frustrated.
Well, let's go back to your timeline. Kind of where we left off in the introduction was, you were a gymnast. That's what you had. And now it's time to move on to your next phase. So what did that look like in your timeline?
Well, the next phase was television, next chapter of my life. So I started to keep my scholarship after the laundry room. I had someone, luckily, who stopped and chatted with me, talk about letting people in. And he helped me make the transition to sports information. So I started as a sports reporter, and I started reporting on all the other athletes, the minor sports more so, not, football and basketball at LSU at the time, but track and field and, golf and diving and all the other sports. And so I started off in that space. And then first time I walked into a newsroom, WBRZ in Baton Rouge, I fell in love with it. And I realized that's what I wanted to do. And I threw myself into that like you would a sport or anything else, and became a reporter. And then I did environmental reporting, and then I became a political reporter, and then I became a general assignment reporter. And
Whoa.
I did, and then I got into, I finally sold out and became a news anchor because I was tired of being poor. And so I'm like, okay, I wanted to be just more than a pretty face back in the day. I was like, I'm fine. Just let me have nice hair and do the news. Fine. So I sold out. I was a news anchor for about a dozen years, 3 shows a day. And it was a really cool time to be in television back then. It was before everything was in your pocket, and you could just pull up your news and weather right there on your phone. So everybody tuned in. It was very Anchorman. If you looked at big hair, big earrings, sides of buses, super cheesy. But those were fun years to be in that business, and I did it for a long time.
We're gonna have to get some headshots for the cover.
Oh my God.
From that.
Well, you can go to my Instagram. I've got some funny ones on there. Like, it's pretty cheesy fun. It definitely looks like that era. Anyway, so I did that, but I got fired at one point in television. I won Charleston's favorite news anchor, Charleston, South Carolina. By the time I'd gotten here, I won Charleston's favorite news anchor on a Thursday. And the paper puts out the thing, and I'm all happy. And I'm walking down to do the news brief on the Friday, the day after, with the weather guy. His name is Rob, and we're going down to cut a news brief, like coming up tonight at 6, blah, 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 blah. And then the GM, who's a general manager of a television station, who's kind of the head, somebody pops their head into the hallway and says, "Hey, the GM wants to see you." So I go walking down the hall, and I think I'm going to get like a bonus or an attaboy or, thank you or something. He sits me down. And a little young girl from HR comes and sits down, and he says, "Nina, per your contract, we are releasing you without cause." And I was let go, but it was nationwide budget cuts. So, and I was like, did I do something wrong? No. Can I get that in writing? All those things. But I was let go in a moment, and they walked in there after 10 years at this TV station. They handed me a box of my stuff. And they walked me out into the parking lot, and I got in my car, and I remember sitting in my Jeep with my box of stuff on my lap thinking, now what? That was one of my now what moments.
Right.
I didn't know what to do with my life. So that was another one of those big, how did this happen? How could this happen to me? Why is this my life? One of those thises. And I sat there for a while. Funny, my parents had moved to Charleston to help with raising kids and stuff. And so I had young kids at home. I was in the middle of a divorce, and I had nowhere to go. Anywhere I went in town, I had full hair and makeup on. Everyone knew I did the news. It would have been weird to go out into the world somewhere. So I drove by my parents' house, and they were out of town, and I got a pair of my mom's sneakers because I was in heels. I got a pair of my mom's sneakers out of the bottom of her closet. They were like a size too small for me, and I crammed my feet in them. And I walked up and down the beach here in Charleston, probably for 2 hours, trying to figure out, how did I get here? How is this my life? What am I going to do in that big now what moment? So I share that because we all have them, no matter what walk of life you're in. I have yet to meet, and I do this for a living now, I have yet to meet anyone who hasn't gone through and had something happen in their life that just was not part of the plan, not part of the plan. And so that was one of my other big moments that I had gone through. And I like to joke. So I was in the middle of a divorce, and I lost my job. I say my life became a country song.
Yes.
I lost my job, my marriage fell apart, and then my dog died. I had a black lab, and he died 2 weeks after that. And I was like, my life is now a country song. my dog died.
That's probably who they wrote it about.
I was 30, I don't know, 35 or so at the time. It was a bad year. Yeah.
Wow.
So what happens next?
I had a non-compete, so I wasn't even allowed to go to work for the other TV stations. I had to sit out for a while, and I sat out until I had one of the TV stations, the station down the street, because it was very popular, scooped me up and hired me after my non-compete went. And then I doubled down and went hard. I had to take a pay cut. They didn't have as much money, but I was bound and determined to do what I loved. And my kids I didn't want to leave the town, but I doubled down. And then I won an Emmy for Best Newscaster in the Southeast with them, just as a kind of F you to the people who let me go.
Yeah, that always feels good.
So that felt good. I spent that time doing that, but I share it because you don't even know where you're going to end up. And I had a wonderful experience there. I think I probably needed that, a wake up call to do things differently. I did get better. I was better at the other station. I worked harder. I saw things differently. I think I'd probably done it for a long time. I kind of took my job for granted.
Is there a lot of farmers that take their jobs for granted?
Probably. I would say.
And if it's a mentality that they have in the mindset of right now, to where they could blindly walk into the bank and the banker says, sorry, I'm not renewing your operating note.
I've heard it a couple times this year.
Yeah. That's going to be a hard conversation. And hopefully our listeners are not in that category, right? They've been listening to Farm for Profit for 6 years. They're doing a lot of the things that we've learned about to make operations be as smooth and as qualified as possible, but it's still going to happen.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking, you talked about your dark time, and there's no question that, suicide is a really big thing, all over the world, but farmers per capita, it's along the lines of veterans or even worse. And I think there's a lot of weight on our shoulders. It's not just our job now, it's generations of weight from, you might have 4, 5, 6, 7 generations. You don't want to be the one to lose it. But anyway, say we're in this dark time. It's going to happen, right? Like, it's okay not to be okay. It's just not okay to stay there. How do we make sure it doesn't go too far?
Yeah, that's a big conversation. And that's why I wrote the book. So I was involved in an accident, and I'm not going to trauma dump and share all that with you, but I was involved in an accident and I became part of the news, and I just couldn't see a life that I wanted after it. Like, I saw no way forward. I thought the world would just be better. Like, my kids would be better if I went, and like all of it. I was just ready to be done. Like, I already did the gymnastics thing. I already did the TV thing. This is while I was in TV. And I was like, I'm just done. And I went and looked for an answer to what do I do? And like, nothing in my life is okay anymore. I don't want to be this person. So say you're the person who loses. I don't want to be that person. That's what it sounds like to me. Like, I don't want to be that guy who literally loses the farm, like they say. Like, I don't want to be that guy. And that's why I wrote this book. And the book has a lot more information than I can go into here. But there's, creating a script in your head that you can say out loud to protect yourself when you're in a tough situation, because the words, that we say become our story. That's a big piece of it. So creating a script to protect yourself, which is a whole concept around cognitive, the way our brains are wired. And then again, pulling in the right people and assessing your humans and making sure you have the right support group around you. And it's a very lonely business from what you say. That support system's really key, but there's always a path forward. One of the things is that lifetime timeline, like, you have to look at it like it's just a really bad chapter in your life. It's not the end. That's why the name of my book is This Is Not the End, whatever this is that you're dealing with. There's always a path forward. It may not be at all what you imagine. I joke sometimes to my kids, because they're all smarter than I ever have been. Like, they're so smart. I'm like, if you ever get there before you like do something really stupid that you can't take back, I'm like, hack into my bank account, steal my money, go do something crazy or stupid, like you like do the face tat and the orange hair and like just go off the rails. Anything's better than doing that. Like, you just, the world will keep going. There'll be another chapter. The news will move on to the next thing. There'll be another season of farming that will happen with or without you. There's always some way forward. And if you're the guy who loses the farm, then that's part of your story. then you own that, and you have to get to the acceptance piece through the stages of grief, denial, negotiation, all those things. Once you get the people who get to acceptance are the ones who do okay and have success. Like, yep, this is going to be me. I'm going to be that guy. And how am I going to talk about it? What am I going to do with it? And what am I going to do next? I mean, it is a matter of ownership and the scripts that we create, because like I said, we live in our own heads. And I will tell you, one of the really interesting things, when I was in television, I thought like the world revolved around television. Everybody watched it every night. I was so committed to that. And when I lost my job, I thought everybody knew it and it was a big deal. No one knows what you're doing. Everyone has listened to WYFM. What's in it for me? No one knows what you're doing or cares what you're doing. You can go on and do something like, I don't know any of the guys that are farmers or women who are farmers where you are. My life's going to go on and be totally what it is, whatever. You have to get out of your own head and go, this is my universe that it's happening in. There's a whole big old world out there. And it's really that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to find someone to tell me what to do. And there were books on PTSD. There were books on cognitive behavior. There's lots of books, and lots of other people's stories. And Lord knows when you're in the middle of that, the last thing you want is to hear somebody else's sad story. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, do this. So that's the thinking behind it. So real practical things just to get your head. It's all going on in your own mind to get your head back in a better place.
So is being resilient something you're born with? I mean, you talked about it kind of like a muscle, like you can work it out, but are some people born with it?
There's a lot of debate on this. Scientists will say in certain ways some people are born more resilient than others, but that's more in your genetic makeup and whether diseases are going to, affect you different ways. Mental resilience happens, and a lot of the research shows around this. Mental resilience happens as you handle things as you grow. So if you grew up in a really easy household where everything was done for you and you didn't have to, pick yourself up off the floor of the shop, or you didn't have to, like, you always had plenty of food, then you're not as resilient. But if you grew up in a way in which you learned to take care of yourself and you got to see that when bad things happen, you can handle it and it's not the end, then you become more resilient. You learn coping skills. So it's a muscle you build. You build it over time and it never stops building. You get stronger and stronger. After I went through that and got through it, and then I was in tech and I had huge success in tech. I started a startup and then we took the company public, big IPO. I was part of the team that did that. But during that, there were grown men who were having a really difficult time with the stress of all that and trying to manage through it. Some of the finance guys and stuff. And I was just like, come on, we got this. Like, nothing, I'm bulletproof. Right. Like, if this doesn't work, this is the worst thing that's going to happen to us is we're going to have a financial failure. Like, I have 2 legs and I can still see, like, there's so many other things I can be thankful for.
That's powerful.
It's just a different way to think. A financial failure is just financial. It's not your whole life.
So I mean, it's kind of like, I'm going to take this back to sports. It's kind of like the Detroit Lions this year. Uh-huh. Those guys will not punt on 4th down. Yeah. And they know that they're going to go for it on 4th down if they're even remotely close. Like, they're unstoppable because of that. And I'm not a Lions fan at all. I'm actually a Packers fan, but it's like, man, you almost, if you're on the other side of the ball, you just feel deflated because it's like, if we stop them, usually your mentality is if we stop them on 3rd down, they're going to punt. Punt. Now it's like,
how much of a mind screw up is that?
Yeah.
You're on defense.
So if you're not scared of failure to start with, like, how much more potential do you have?
Amazing. Like, I can remember being on a tiny little jet going to Teterboro, like a big deal for me. I didn't come from money. It wasn't like I'd never been on a private jet before, but I'm part of this team doing this big financial thing. And so I'm on this private little jet, and these men who probably grew up, some of them around jets and things, that was the world. They were so stressed and so worried and in a different mindset than me and a few other people, like our CEO's tough as nails and been through some stuff. I remember thinking, like, this is just money. Like, it's going to work or it's not going to work. These people are going to like us or they're not going to like. I can't make you like me. Like, if you don't like me, like, you could race this whole podcast afterwards and go, she's so full of shit. But like, I can't make you like me. I can't make things work. They're out of my control. This is a piece of the stoicism in the way my mind works, and also going through enough failures that it's okay. On my podcast, so I'll mention it, it's called This Seriously Sucks. the right podcast when life goes seriously wrong. And I've had this guy, Joe Delagrave, who's a Paralympian. Like, he was a college football player and was in a boating accident and became paralyzed from the chest down. And he's so badass, cool, and amazing as 3-time Paralympian and wheelchair rugby. Like, wow. I can't imagine that. Like, that's, so you lose some money or your farm goes under. Like, there's so many other things you still have that somebody would give their arm, literally give an arm and a leg for.
Right.
Yeah. Like, there's always somebody behind you who wishes they had what you had. And there's always somebody ahead of you that you're chasing. You just got to kind of get comfortable with where you are in the middle there and go, this is me. This is my journey. And I'm doing the best I can each day in the moment that I have, making the decisions I can. And sometimes it's not going to go right, or something bad's going to happen and shit's going to hit the fan, and I'm going to figure out a path forward.
That was going to be my last question before summarizing. And usually when I say I have a last question, Corey's got 5 or 6 more.
I think I'm pretty good.
What was the resources? You know, you've got your podcast, you've got your books. What else can our listeners lean into if they want to get ahead of this? They want to start working their muscle.
Well, I have my book is This Is Not the End: Strategies to Get Through the Worst Chapters of Your Life. My podcast is This Seriously Sucks, and I've only got a couple of seasons I need to get back in and get that going again. I've sort of put it on hiatus. Mm-hmm. But I also have a workshop, my Now What workshop, which is nowwhatworkshop.com. And they can follow me on Instagram or I think I'm kind of entertaining and funny, and I put daily inspiration and motivation and a lot of my screw ups on there. And as I said, motivation and inspiration are kind of like a shower. You have to keep sprinkling it on. It's not good for just once. It's part of what we all need because life gets tough. We need to build ourselves back up.
That is absolutely perfect. To kind of lead into a summarization. Prior to doing that, I want to ask Corey his opinion on a question, because one of the comments that you said is, tough times make you stronger. And it's interesting because we've got a lot of our industry that fully believe that the harder I work physically, like the more hours that I put in, the more physical time and effort that I put in is what's going to make me the happiest or most successful. But I'd argue that there's probably just as much work that you can do mentally or do on yourself personally that could lead to that same success. What do you think?
What was the question? Just my opinion on that?
Yeah.
I think you're right in that. I mean, there's a certain amount of work in farming that you have to do in any career that you have to do. I mean, we've been at some other conferences that weren't farming this last week, and more land and a lot of entrepreneurs and a couple billionaires. There's a lot of work that's not seen from. There's a lot of successful people that you never see the work they took to get there, and a lot of people go, "Wow, they're just lucky." They hit it right. But there's a lot of 20-hour work days and they slept for 2 hours,
mm-hmm.
or whatever. But I do think there's some of that mental toughness and maybe the work smarter, not harder concept in agriculture that we could adopt and be successful.
So I wrote a lot of things down, Nina, and I appreciate that. Corey was right. I knew I was going to geek out on a show like this, and I think, and I hope it's going to provide our audience some value. So I want to cover a couple of things and rehash what you said. One of those was surround yourself with people. And I wrote down, surround yourself with people that have been through shit. Like you got to have your helpful people around you, but it's not a bad idea to find people that have been through hard times to be able to get you through that. And maybe for our listeners, that's talking to the older generation. Farming crisis in the 80s. We're not there today. I don't think 2025 is going to get there. But talk through what made them resilient, because you don't want to go through this alone. I love the self-sabotage portion of this, that don't be hard on yourself. It's okay to not be okay, but we got to fix it. I think we've said that 5 or 6 times now. Just get out of that position. You reiterated one that I wrote down too. Inspiration is a shower, and some of us maybe need it more than once a day, Corey. But ultimately, it is something that is extremely valuable. Clear back in the beginning, you mentioned that if you spend too much time in your past, that's what leads to depression. But if you spend too much time in the future, that's what generates anxiety. You got to focus on what is available now that we can take control of, and do that to the best of our abilities. So those are some things that I jotted down and I thought were key takeaways for me. So again, we want to say thank you for the time, for taking on a podcast that is out of your realm, right? Talking to agriculture, talking to farmers and ag business professionals, to share from your experiences and like you've said over time, your challenges and what it takes to build up your resiliency. So really appreciate that.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you guys. I always like learning about different industries and kind of seeing what other people struggle with. So this was really fun for me to jump into your world for a moment. Hope what I shared was helpful. And I think it goes back to a lot for your folks. It's not going to be easy. And just knowing that life's not easy and being okay with that. And like, you're doing a hard thing. Be proud of yourself for doing a hard thing. Like, you got to get in your own head and go, I'm okay with me being me in this moment. I'm doing the best I can. Like, we live in our own heads. That's our reality. So, so you're going to spend a lot of time in your own head, make it a nice place to be.
I love that. And yeah, I'm just going to say thank you again. I really appreciate that. Listeners, we also really appreciate you. It's a sincere offer. 515-207-9640. We're not going to claim to fix you, but we
sometimes just need to talk to someone.
We could be there to have a conversation. Yep. Absolutely. So listeners, until next time, have a good one.